Good day, bonjour. It's good to be back in this room. I'm kind of missed it a bit. Bonjour tout le monde. So today I want to talk about two things. One, we're having our caucus meeting today with the team, a summer caucus meeting. Looking forward to speaking with our team. And what we're doing actually in the purpose of this meeting is to continue to find ways to fight for people. As we have throughout the pandemic, we've been continually in touch with what people are going through and then proposing ways to help people in this difficult time. And from the feedback we're getting from our ridings and from the work that my MPs are doing, people are still not through this. We are still dealing with the pandemic. There are a lot of sectors that are still hard hit. I was able to do a tour of some of the hard hit sectors, including the tourism sector, where workers can't get back to work because those jobs are just not there. There's many hotel workers that can't get back to work. Their jobs are just not there. So we need to continue to fight for people, and particularly small businesses are saying that they need support to continue because they're not back on their feet yet. It's going to take time for that consumer confidence to return and people to get out and start buying. And it will happen, but people are worried, and small businesses are worried that if the help that they need is cut off, that they won't be able to recover. So we want to continue to find ways to fight for people and support people. The other thing that is really and particularly important as a BC NDP or as a BC MP, we have seen the impacts of the climate crisis right now. In my riding in Burnaby South, there were extreme heat waves, temperatures that people have never seen. Homes are not built to deal with temperatures like that. In the lower mainland, people don't have ventilated homes for hot weather. It's not something that happens regularly, so people aren't prepared, and lots of people lost their lives. We're seeing forest fires starting early and intense. An entire town of Lytton was wiped out, and the air quality is severely impacted right now. With the forest fires, the air quality was impacted when we were in Edmonton and Calgary. This is serious. The climate crisis is impacting us today. There are forest fires in Northern Ontario, in Manitoba. Across the country, we're feeling the impacts. And that's why we need to respond with the urgency of the problem. This is serious. And to do this, we got to take on the big polluters. We've got to create good jobs that help us reduce emissions. We are committed to doing that. Donc aujourd'hui, on va avoir une rencontre avec notre équipe, mes députés, et je suis encouragé par le travail qu'ils ont fait depuis pendant cet été. Mais la raison pour laquelle on va avoir cette rendez-vous, cette réunion, c'est pour continuer de parler de comment on peut continuer de se battre pour les gens. Comme on a fait pendant la pandémie, on va continuer ce travail. Donc, on va parler de comment on peut continuer de livrer l'aide aux gens, d'aider les gens qui sont toujours dans une crise, parce que la COVID-19 n'est pas finie. On est toujours dans la pandémie et il y a plusieurs secteurs qui sont toujours frappés, toujours fermés. Il y a plusieurs travailleurs et travailleuses qui ne peuvent pas retourner au travail. Donc, ça, c'est pourquoi on va avoir cette rencontre aujourd'hui. On veut continuer le travail, on veut continuer de faire ce qu'on a fait pendant la pandémie, de livrer la marchandise pour aider les gens. Deuxièmement, on a vu des impacts horribles de la crise climatique. Et le fait que cette crise climatique, ce n'est pas une crise pour l'avenir, c'est une crise pour aujourd'hui. Et on a déjà vécu les réalités avec les canicules en Colombie-Britannique, des canicules jamais vues, et les impacts sont horribles. Plusieurs personnes ont perdu leur vie à cause des canicules en Colombie-Britannique. On a vu la même chose au Québec l'année passée. Donc, c'est vraiment une exigence, une urgence d'aujourd'hui, la crise climatique. On a des feux de forêt, des feux causés par les crises climatiques à travers le pays. Donc, on doit agir, on doit répondre avec des états concrets et avec le même niveau d'urgence que la crise présente. Et finalement, je pense qu'on a une opportunité dans la relance de s'attaquer aux grands pollueurs et de créer des emplois de qualité qui réduisent nos émissions. Donc, merci infiniment encore d'être ici. Thanks so much for being here. And I'm ready for any questions you might have. Je suis prêt pour vos questions. Merci.
We'll now take questions, starting with questions on the phone. A quick reminder, one question, one follow-up per reporter. Nous allons maintenant passer aux questions, commençant par les questions au téléphone, comme à l'habitude. Une question de suivi. par journaliste. Opérateur, avons-nous une première question?
Thank you. Merci. For questions, please press star 1 on the device's keypad. Pour toute question, faites étoile 1 sur votre appareil. Once again, please press star 1 on the device's keypad if you have a question. De nouveau, n'hésitez pas à faire étoile 1 pour toute question. We have no questions over the phone lines. Nous avons aucune question au téléphone. Back to the floor. De retour à la Chambre.
And we'll take questions from the room. On peut prendre les questions dans la salle. Jordan?
Good morning, Mr. Singh.
morning.
Good to see you in person as
Yeah.
well again. I want to ask you just first off about the U.S. border, because there are reports that the Americans decided to extend the border restrictions until August the 21st. I just wanted to ask you, is this maybe what this first off says about the government's move to start rolling back restrictions on American travelers coming here on August 9th? I mean, what does this tell you about maybe the government's decision? Did they move too quickly on this? Did they jump ahead of things? What do you make of this?
Thanks for the question. I grew up in a border town in Windsor, and in Windsor, this is a reality not just of people that want to come across the border, maybe for tourism or for other activities. These are families that live on both sides of the border, people that are deeply connected. People often worked on one side of the border and lived on the other, and vice versa. There are many families where people have not been able to see their loved ones because they couldn't drive across the border for almost going on a year and a half. This has been really tough and really difficult, particularly in towns like that, in towns that are border towns where families are often spread out. And so this is important that we get it right. It's important that people can start to plan ahead. And I've been saying, two key things. One, we have to always follow the best advice and the best evidence from our public health officials. We need to make sure we're making good decisions that are based on what's safe for Canadians. And so that's paramount. And the second thing that I think is really important we need to reflect on is a plan, a clear plan, so that families can plan around that. They know, when will borders open up and when will I be able to see my loved ones again? When will we be able to travel again? It's also important for businesses to know they can make plans knowing that, okay, when the borders open, things might pick up. They need to be able to adjust for that. So those are the two things that I feel like have been missing so far. The Liberal government has not done a really good job of laying out a clear plan and laying out what are the steps that we are required to hit before we open up, and when can families expect that to happen. So that's been the issue. And then with the changing of dates, things might be flexible because of the changes in the reality of variants and the infection, but we've got to make sure we get this right and we protect Canadians.
Maybe just to add to that a little bit then, what do you think should be done differently then? You've talked about a specific plan. What do you think should be done differently at the border to make sure that there is some coherent connection really between American policy and Canadian policy?
One of the things that we've seen throughout the pandemic is there hasn't been really like a guideline laid out by the Liberal government in terms of what is the path to opening up and what do we need to achieve by the time we're ready to open up and what that is. A lot of people have been feeling left out. They don't know what's going on. They don't understand the reasons or the decisions and the reasons behind those decisions. So there's been a lack of real transparency and clarity. Folks in Windsor didn't know what we needed to achieve before the border could be opened up. They don't know when this will actually happen. There's a bit of a sense now in terms of opening up in August, but effectively there's been a lack of clear transparency and a clear plan that's made people feel very confused and worried and uncertain.
And once again, I'll check on the phone to see if we have any questions. Operator?
Thank you. Merci. We do have questions now on the telephones. The first question is from Kevin Gallagher from CTV National News. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Good morning, Mr. Singh. Thanks for taking our questions. I just wanted to know, there is a summit on fighting anti-Semitism today, and of course one tomorrow on fighting Islamophobia. What do you think are the main actions that need to be taken by government and public office holders to do more to fight this type of hate and intolerance?
First off, I think these summits are great. It's very important. These are demands of the community, Jewish community and Muslim community have requested and asked for these, and it's important that we listen. We listen to what they share, what the communities share in terms of solutions. But what I have to really highlight is that there are a number of solutions that we have known about for years. And sadly, Mr. Trudeau has not responded, has not taken action. And that has been to the detriment of people. We knew about the radicalization of the horrible massacre of the attacker in the massacre in Quebec City, in the mosque in Quebec City. We knew that that attacker was radicalized by online hate years ago, and yet nothing was done to tackle online hate by Justin Trudeau and the federal Liberal government. That was a mistake. And that was something that is hurting people. So some of the things we can do immediately: tackle online hate. We can make sure that the resources that we have at the federal level, we evaluate the systemic, in the case of Islamophobia, the systemic Islamophobia that exists at an institutional level. We can make decisions around putting resources towards the real and urgent threat to Canadians' lives based on the recent mass killings. Many of them have been founded on or based on hate, particularly towards Muslims. So let's put resources at the federal level, our CSIS, our CBSA, or other federal resources towards dismantling white supremacist groups, extreme right-wing groups that are spreading divisive and hateful messages that are resulting in the loss of lives of people. This is important. We have to take it on. And it's not good enough to just talk about it. We want to see action, and that's what we'll be pushing for.
I'll take my follow-up. Yes, just specifically on fighting online hate. I mean, how can you balance government regulation, perhaps regulating large tech companies, and freedom of people to express their opinions online, freedom of online behavior to an extent? This has always sort of been the pushback, right? So what's the best way forward in terms of regulating hate speech and the growth of hate networks online?
It's a very important question. And right now there are really two options. The current existing model is we leave Mark Zuckerberg to do it. Facebook does it. I think that's a bad model. It hasn't worked. They're not doing a good job of it, and they don't have a vested interest in it. They just want to make money. Their goal is, how do we get as many eyes as possible on something? How does something get shared as much as possible? How do we increase our revenue through advertising? There's not a desire or a interest in actually protecting people. So that's one option. That has failed. And I think it's incumbent on Canadians to have a say about what is appropriate and what's not. And the way we have a say is we've got elected officials, and we can bring in legislation that regulates online hate. It should be the government's responsibility. And that's why we've been calling for it for a long time. We've got hate speech laws. We know, and we've agreed as a society, that there's certain things you can't say. Absolutely not. We can't incite people to go out and kill someone based on their religion, based on their sexuality. That's not allowed. I think that's a fair limit, and Canadians agree that we should not be allowing people to spread misinformation designed to inflame hatred against Asians, against people of the Jewish faith, the Muslim faith. That should not happen. There's no doubt about it. And that should also apply online. And right now, you can't use hate speech in public or in written form, and there could be remedies. But if you're doing it online, there is no remedy. There's no way to stop it right now. That has to end. And we know that it is directly causing damage, violence, and loss of life to Canadians. So we've got to respond with urgency. This is serious. I've met with people that have been impacted. I met with the community in London, still reeling from that massacre. They're feeling the results of online hate. They're afraid, and their community has been directly impacted. So we need to make sure we respond.
Opérateur, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Travis Denraj from CBC News. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi there, Mr. Singh. Thank you for taking my question today.
Hey there.
Just to follow up on Kevin's questions about this summit, were you invited to the summit? And if not, would you have liked to be at the table to discuss some of the NDP's ideas?
My understanding is that the critics were invited, and so in our case, it's Lindsay Matheson, and so she's attending on behalf of New Democrats for both summits. And I'm looking forward to getting her feedback and her report in terms of what we need to do. These are really opportunities to listen to the community and hear from them, hear from the Jewish community about what needs to be done. We know that anti-Semitism is also still on the rise. There's serious cases of anti-Semitism. Islamophobia is on the rise. We know that hate is very much like a fire. It's not isolated. It will spread. It will consume everyone. So we've all got a collective responsibility to listen to people impacted and then to respond with action. And that's been my focus. There's action we can take right now that I've outlined, and we'll listen to the recommendations and hear from community and then do our best to be their voice and to push for the real action.
The Independent Jewish Voices of Canada put out a release today, basically saying that they're quite upset that critical voices that wanted to be part of this national summit are being cut out, and the government is picking and choosing who it wants to hear from. Have you heard of that, and are you concerned about a very small scope of voices being heard?
It is on the government to do their job of making sure they hear from everyone and do their job of doing proper outreach to make sure every voice is heard. That's their responsibility to do, and so that is their responsibility. I've been making sure in my work to speak to as many people as possible, and anytime a voice is that is raised that hasn't had an opportunity yet to express, I think it's important for us to listen. Our job. And what our job should be is to make sure we hear from as many people as possible about the struggles they're going through in general, and in this case, specifically the hate they're experiencing and the fear that they're experiencing, so we can come up with the best solutions possible. So that's an ongoing job. It doesn't stop. It means ongoing listening and ongoing reaching out. And I'll continue to commit to do my best to reach out to and listen to as many people as possible.
Operator, next question.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Mary Brooke from Island Social Trends. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi, Mr. Singh. So you've been You've been going across Canada a little bit, different regions, and I'm just wondering if your messaging about housing and small business is resonating differently, say, in Western Canada than it is in Central Canada.
Really appreciate the question. Nice to hear your voice. I think that housing before the pandemic was really a unifying crisis. Everywhere across the country, people were feeling the impacts in some way or another. It was a very common struggle, and I think it's only gotten worse. The pandemic has meant that people have kind of hunkered down and tried to find a place they can live, and then a lot of Canadians are not able to. There was a report recently that said that only a third of Canadians today could afford to buy a home, and that means many people live in a home that they couldn't buy today. They live in a home that they literally could not purchase if it was on the market today. 2/3 of Canadians are experiencing that. That means 2/3 of Canadians cannot afford to buy a home in the current market. Things are pretty bad, and it's something that is across the country. I've heard this concern raised in BC, of course, when I was spending time back in my riding. And on the island, I know you've heard from stories of people that can't find a place to live. And the real struggle that we're seeing is that it's everyone. There are people that have got good income that can't find a place to live, young professionals. There are young families that can't find a place to live, people who just graduated and are starting off life. They can't find anything in their budget. It's really that no matter where you are on the spectrum, people are struggling, unless you're the ultra rich, people are struggling to be able to find a home that's in their budget. And that's something we've got to fix. And I'm committed to doing that.
And also a bit from the West Coast with the wildfire smoke out here and the heat dome that we all experience. Putting that into housing standards, what are you proposing perhaps as the NDP to see better building code standards for new housing and for existing housing to have funding pretty quickly to go to building owners and or the residents to improve their conditions?
This is a sad reality that you're highlighting of the fact that in the Lower Mainland, I was in Burnaby at the time of the worst of the heat wave, And homes are not built to deal with those type of temperatures. That's not something that was common in the Lower Mainland. Like you don't get temperatures consistently over 30 degrees, 35 degrees, hitting 40. That doesn't happen. Homes are not designed for that. Buildings aren't designed for that. And so the reality is, we've talked a lot about in the recovery an opportunity to retrofit homes to lower their emissions. We also need to retrofit homes to better equip them, and buildings and industrial and commercial buildings, they need to be retrofitted to be prepared for the realities of the climate crisis. Increasing temperatures means buildings and homes and have to be retrofitted so they can actually be prepared for increased temperatures. And that also means the new homes that we build across this country have to be built with that in mind, that they have to be ready and resilient to deal with the climate crisis and changing temperature. Things that normally weren't a concern are now concerns, and we have to make sure that we respond to that. And then finally, the building code, I think it's important that there's an update around what are the appropriate codes given the reality of a climate crisis, increased temperatures in areas that normally didn't have to worry about that. That means that building codes might need to change to address the new reality of the climate crisis. That's not to say that I'm giving up on the fight. We are going to fight it with everything we have. We know this is serious, and there are ways for us to fight it. And I'm optimistic about our chances. We can do a lot. There's a lot of technology out there. It's just a matter of making the right choices.
Opérateur, avons-nous une prochaine question au téléphone?
There are no further questions at this time. Il n'y a plus de questions à ce moment-ci.
And I'll take one last question in the room. Jordan?
I get two quick ones in here. So very quickly, Mr. Singh, I want to ask, a colleague of mine was wondering your thoughts on this, because a number of progressives came out in the last few days talking about the purchase of fighter jets, and that maybe right now, due to the pandemic, not just for the cost, but also for climate change reasons, maybe we don't need to purchase them right now. Wondering your thoughts on that.
We've seen in this pandemic that our armed forces really stepped up and provided a lot of help. A lot of people's lives were saved, not surprisingly, because the forces have done this time and time again. In times of crisis, they've been there, whether it's crisis caused by the environment or, in this case, the horrible conditions of long-term care homes. The men and women who serve have stepped up and helped us out and been there for Canadians. I think it's important that the men and women who work for us, who work in the armed forces, have the equipment they need to do their job. And that's not to say that this Liberal government has horribly failed in terms of procurement again and again. They have, and we need to be very vigilant to make sure every dollar is being spent appropriately. But if we're going to task our armed forces with jobs, they should have the tools to be able to do those jobs. And that's what I believe.
Maybe just very quickly too, off the bat, you talked about what you've been hearing from people as you've gone around the country and what your MPs are hearing as well. It sounded like though the concerns are more economic than they are health related at the moment in regards to the pandemic. So is that the case? Is that it's your understanding that more people are more worried now about their economic situation as opposed to their health situation, or is it something different than that?
No, not at all. I highlighted two of the two issues that came up, but what came up actually very frequently was pharmacare, medication coverage. And it's not surprising given that a lot of people who lost their jobs also lost their benefits or lost income and are finding it even harder to get medication. And that healthcare is very much top of mind. People are worried about health. In Alberta, it was the number one concern. In Alberta right now, Jason Kenney has slashed healthcare so much that people are desperately worried if they'll be able to get the care they need if their loved one falls sick. So it was the number one concern in Alberta was healthcare. So healthcare is certainly on people's mind because of the pandemic. I met a woman, her name is Shannon. She came up to me with tears in her eyes and said, I really need my medication covered. And that's her biggest fear. And she got choked up and couldn't talk. And I asked her, like, things are pretty bad, like for her to be so choked up. And she nodded. And I'm like, would it help you if we covered medication? And she nodded really emphatically. And I told her, we're going to keep on fighting for that. And, that gave her some sense of hope for the future. But that's a real big concern for a lot of people. They can't get the healthcare they need. Dental care is something that's coming up a lot too. So healthcare, big concern, housing for sure. And then how do we support people in the recovery? Those are the things that have come up a lot.
And this concludes today's press conference. Ceci me fait la conférence de presse. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you.